Hey everyone, it's Donna here again, inviting you to today's self-love reunion speaker. And I am super excited. First, I invite you to hit the subscribe button. And just to remind everyone, this self-love reunion was put together because 1 in 2 women across the globe actually have more self-doubt than self-love. This reunion is here to help transform and help people get into that space of deeper self-respect, because love is the most powerful force in existence. I'll see you on the inside. Well, hello everyone. It's Donna here again at the Art of Self-Love Reunion, where together we are revitalizing the human spirit in these incredible times we're in. And today I have another 1-hour special guest with me, and I'd like to share and introduce with you Lisa J. Weiss. She is the founder of Eye of the Storm Coaching and Consulting, an internal communications expert, as well as an inspired living coach. Lisa's been described as a thought disruptor and a healer, inviting people to consider their choices from an internally driven perspective. In her over 23 years working with individuals and teams, Lisa has noticed that people who are in high pressure jobs or situations often have problems identifying and articulating what they are really feeling and thinking when they are under stress. Lisa developed the core guidance alignment process to help these individuals to come out of situations where they're tired of not being able to clearly express how they're feeling and end up being misunderstood. Unlike other coaches who focus on strategy-based process and outcomes based on situations, Lisa helps people clearly identify exactly what they're feeling and articulate it in a way that allows them to be heard and create greater connection. Well, Lisa, this is going to be incredible because communication is often thought of as this, right? Yes. Instead of this. So you're bringing it all here and out, and I'm excited to hear so much more about this and spend the next hour with you. So first of all, I'd love to hear about Eye of the Storm Coaching and Consulting. What is this? How did this come about? Some of your story, if you wouldn't mind starting there with us.
Absolutely. So happy to be a part of this initiative with you, Donna. And Eye of the Storm came about 11 years ago. And my background is communications. I've always been in the area of communications, strategic communications, process communications, and all that. And then when I got my coaching designation, I was on my back porch one day doing a guided reflection, trying to think of who am I going, who would I want to be when I grow up, the next thing, and what's the next thing that I'm going to do? And Eye of the Storm, as in the letter I of the storm, came up, and that just resonated with me so much, because when you think about it, when you think of a storm, the eye of the storm is where the calm is. And when you think of everything that goes on in our life, the storms swirling around us, and oftentimes we're in it, right? We're swirling around like everything. And if we can remember that we are the eye, to get ourselves to that place of knowing this is the calm in the storm, and it doesn't matter what's swirling around me, I can be in this place so that I can have a different perspective of what's going on in my life. And so that's how Eye of the Storm was born. And it sort of reminds people that it's not, for me, it's not about having this life that's perfect, because nothing is perfect. It's about knowing no matter what happens, I can find my center.
And how do we do that? I mean, in some regard, and I'm coming from this space of, we know the world we're in right now, and things are changing so much, so even just me introducing you and working under that stress, there's this everyday stress that a lot of people are feeling. So to come into this space, and we're talking here together about self-love, that is so key to be the eye in that storm.
Right.
So let's take some journeying and figure out how does someone do this when they have navigated it likely in some regard in some areas of their lives, right? We forget those little bumps are helping us for the bigger bumps, right?
Right.
So how do we navigate? How do we?
Right. So, if I use my story, bits of my story as the backdrop for this, like you said, I developed this really unique and powerful process for people to identify what's moving inside of them. A lot of my work has to do with getting us out of our heads and it back into our bodies to actually pay attention to the information that our bodies are presenting. And so in my process, I've identified 4 stages of things that we cycle through in order to determine where we are. And so if I go back, when I was 4, I came from Trinidad. My parents brought me up from Trinidad, and it was a shock to my system. And I thought I was going back to Trinidad with my grandmother. And when I realized I wasn't, I left. And that's the sort of the first stage, disembodiment, right? How often do some traumatic event happens and we actually leave our bodies? We're up here hovering, right? It's like we're observers to our life. As a result of that, I actually had no memory. I have no memory up until about my last year of elementary school and beginning of high school, right? And so sometimes if you notice, you have gaps, right? And you really, when things are really intense, you vacate the premises. So that's disembodiment. The second place I went was because of that, I created this brilliant strategy called cerebral. I was always in my head, always coming up with a story.
Feeling the resonance, please.
Right?
Yeah.
Nobody knew what was going on behind the Iron Curtain. My head was always running 24/7, 365 days a year. I had scenarios of over scenarios, over scenarios, over scenarios. I became really good at calibrating what was going on in the room and making up stories about it. And so cerebral became another phase. So things had to be really intense for me to feel,
Yeah.
and I go to my head.
Right.
The third stage is what I called aware. And in aware, so there's stuff, I could feel that there was stuff going on in my body. I could talk about it a little bit. Oftentimes my mind went blank, so our minds go blank. We're not quite, we can articulate some, but not all. And when we're in those high stress moments, it's difficult for us because we're not actually feeling, right, what's going on in ourselves, or we're feeling just a little bit of what's that. And so those are sort of the worst, the kind of next to worst, and what's tolerable.
Right. And almost feeling old memories, like
Yes.
continue a repeating of a pattern of feeling, right? So that
Absolutely.
feeling that you're probably speaking of, only because I'm like, oh, again, I'm resonating. It's, I keep feeling, of course I'm feeling it, right? And then I'm living it, and then
Yes.
I am it.
Yes.
Right?
And then because our patterns of behavior of humans is habituation, our intellect, the cerebral, comes in and makes up a story around it. Oh, if you're feeling this inside of you, let's call it anger. And in anger, this is how we're going to react, because that's based on our past. Where we want to take ourselves is to be aligned and connected, right? Where I can feel, notice what's going on in my body, the sensations that we then layer over it in something we call emotion, and move away from the emotion part of it and go, oh, this is information. And am I willing to be in here when the information moves? And then when my body actually settles, I'm able to articulate it. And of course, I'm giving you the Coles Notes version.
Of course, because I'm sitting here and as I'm listening, I'm like, but I am in alignment sometimes, and I'm like, but that must be the work that you do with your clients on a deep. And I mean, we don't need to go into the full-on spectrum of what you do with your clients. I want to understand but I want them to understand, the audience, absolutely, because
Absolutely. So if you think of it like a spiral, right? We cycle through these.
Right.
And so you might find yourself disembodied. You might find yourself in cerebral. You might find yourself in aware. And through working with me in my process, it's about coming to that place of knowing I can be aligned, right? So the core guidance realignment process is about helping you become realigned with that core being of who you are. Right.
And then you are grounded and in your power, and you're able to communicate, right?
Yes.
And so, right. So then this communication is because this inside is allowing you to truly embody it.
Absolutely.
Yes? Right.
It becomes, I'm not communicating from an intellectual perspective. I'm communicating because the information is actually coming from my body and informing me, and the words come.
Right.
Right. And it's a game shifter.
You know, I think one of the words, and I'm just making some notes as we chat, just if there's things that trigger myself, but you know, you spoke right early about trauma, right? Your trauma. And right away, I know that gap. I'm like, I can go back, and I've been doing journeying and working and lots of healing. But I think trauma is a misunderstood word a lot of times, as is mental health and some of these big blanket statements. And I think, you know, just to share with the audience, give us some ideas of trauma, because a lot of times we think of trauma, accidents, big things, but maybe just a spattering of different types of trauma and clients that you would work with, because I think that opens up people's perspective to feel like, oh, I can take this step.
Right.
Because and again, I'm really just going from, and maybe this is part of the intellect, but when you speak of high pressure jobs, a lot of people would think that in of itself, well, I'm not an air traffic controller. I'm not I don't have a team of 1,000 that I'm dealing with. So what is all of that?
Right. And there's so many layers to trauma.
Sure.
Right. And so if we think about as a child, right? So let's say you're 2 years old and you're in your playpen and your parents are having an argument and you're witnessing this. And then they remember, oh, they're in the playpen. So say one of your parents comes, lifts you up and takes you into your bedroom, puts you in your bed, closes the door so that they can have their argument. For a 2-year-old, that's trauma. Right? So we go a little bit older. We get a little bit older.
And the birthing process is trauma.
Oh my God, that is
right. That. Like we can't even, sorry, my head went to, hold on, the birthing canal is trauma.
It can be. So again, it depends, right? It depends what your mother was going through in the experience, because all that information is locked inside of us cellularly. And when the time we were born, were we born where we had forceps pulling us out? Were we born where they slapped us, which was the first thing that happened when we came out of our parents, we got slapped. That is trauma that's in the body. So sometimes trauma happens in ways that we don't even know we've been traumatized. Hearing someone say something when we're young can traumatize us. And so again, you're so right. We sometimes think of trauma as something big, in an accident or abuse or, extreme neglect. But trauma actually happens on so many different layers. And as we get older, and we become very adept at coming up with strategies to deal with our things, this is now what happens when we're stressed, right? Something gets triggered from when that reminds us, or that is familiar from when we were younger, and we deal with it based on the trauma that age that we were at.
So then that self-love that we're here together to speak of really becomes an important process for people, because otherwise they're living still in that cerebral phase or outside of their bodies. And we see that, right? For those in the audience who may resonate and truly feel, right? Because we're opening to a world that we resonate so much. And we don't understand necessarily how to navigate that, but self-love. So talk about maybe self-love and some of your clients and what they're finding, just from simple exercises maybe, and you don't have to get into all the exercises, but just let's talk around that a little bit.
Well, self-love the whole notion of love, the word love is a loaded bomb,
Right.
right? Because we learn love from our family system, right? And the thing that I have seen over the years in all of my clients, including myself, when I was going through my coaching process, and is we don't learn unconditional love. We learn that love comes with condition.
Mhm.
And so self love often comes with conditions.
Right.
And it's about coming back to this place. If you go back to the eye of the storm, that core being of who I am is all about unconditional love. And in the work that I do, it's about helping people to understand this thing that we're striving for called perfection that doesn't exist actually keeps us away from what that unconditional love is. And when we are willing to take the journey to realize that all these things, these shadow aspects of ourselves, is part of it,
Mhm.
right? To love my whole self, all of me. And that takes a journey. We're taught, when you look at a baby, they're pure love. And then we're taught something different.
Yeah. And then that filters just from that early on age, and then you get into being a teenager and trying to navigate in high school, and then now you want to understand intimacy love or something in that regard, takes a whole nother frame of its own, takes a whole nother when you move out on your own, right? So there's this trauma we speak of, right, brings up so much. And even you using the word, the shadow side, I think so many people want to use the language, it's negative or it's positive, it's good for me, it's bad for me. So thank you for using that word. And I think I really want to weave in part of what you do, and a beautiful part of what you do is the power of words, right?
Yes. Yes.
As that communication. So as much as you're guiding people internally, let's share some of this power of words, because just using the word shadow doesn't bring that charge, right? So can you share about words and
Oh, yes.
how we choose, right?
Absolutely. Words are my superpower, right?
Yeah,
And because every word carries a vibration.
right.
And again, we're not taught to pay attention. Actually, we're taught to stop paying attention to the vibrations of the words from when we're children. And words we use every day. Oh my God, I was so stupid when I did that. Right? Well, you're talking to yourself,
Hmm.
right? The word safe. I had a client once, and I use the word safe all the time, that we're safe in our bodies. And she was saying, I'm having a really tough time, right? I feel like I feel like I'm climbing out of this tunnel, and I had this image of like a vault, a bank vault. And I said, well, when you think of the word safe, what comes up for you?
Hmm.
And she said, it was an image of like a bank vault. And then I looked up the word safe, and I thought, oh my God, the definition of the word safe, there is nothing, there's nothing good.
Nothing that makes you feel safe and
Right.
stable, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I discovered that, I went, oh, right, it's about the vibration of the word. And
Hmm.
so we came up with another word for her
Hmm.
that vibrated differently in her body in order for her to get to the place where she needed to go.
Hmm.
And that's why for me, words are so important. So I pay a lot of attention when I'm engaging with people about where their body goes. And so when they say a word, how does their body react? Is it expansive? So I ask, is it expansive? Is it a contraction? And sometimes we have to give up certain words for a while until the vibration of it changes.
Right.
Right. And so once the vibration of the word changes, it's like relationship.
Well, I was just exactly the word. So here we are, people helping you understand entanglement and whatever. It's a pure on relationship with
Right.
language,
Right.
right?
And relationship comes fraught with so many tentacles.
Right.
Right. And so for me, for a while, I had to let go of the word relationship
Mhm.
and come up with a different word. And now I can use relationship because when I say it, it elicits a different response in my body, right? It's a more expansive, open thing. So words are incredibly important when it comes to the journey.
Well, so I've been asking every time I'm sort of chatting and having conversation with my guests here through this reunion, it's to say, you're this expert helping people. Do you get triggered? I mean, how do you, as somebody that's dealing with this all the time, how do you navigate that for yourself? Do you have these, or you're ensuring that you're stable every day? Like, what kind of exercises do you do to help you stay in that grounded space to
oh my god and we're human. Right, I'm human. Right, and so I of course I have my moments. Now I don't have my moments like I had in the past, right? And I also have a community. I have a community that helps me stay grounded, right? Because my intellect is very strong, and she is always looking always looking for some little hook, right? And so when I'm in those moments, breathing becomes a really important thing. And, as part of the process, I help people to identify if they're breathing from a strategy based outcome to breathing is as a way to be where they are, which is very different, right? And so breath and the different types of breaths and how we use the different types of breath become very important as well. But yeah, I mean, we're all human. I have my moments like everyone else. I mean, I meditate, I go for walks, I'm out in nature. And when I'm in my moments, sometimes it's calling someone and saying, I just need you to bear witness to what's going on. So having community is really important. That's why I love what you're doing, because it's about building community.
And it helps us belong. I was speaking to somebody around community. That's a big word, right? For some, it is that faceless, right? It's so big. It's like, what? Versus how do I find those small groups? Because we have them, whether that's a small group of girlfriends, I'll say, or your own family. Those are all communities. But then having almost that new, clear, vulnerable space to have community, right? I think that's really key, or it certainly was key and has been key and continues to be, that you have spaces where you can find your own courage to, okay, because again, there's still some of those triggers and traumas and, not understanding where you are in your principles and guidelines and this process. Yeah. Wow. Beautiful, beautiful. So what about, I guess there's a couple things. I want to go with when you were speaking earlier, there's this, if we're not in that resonance, I know for myself, there's this nervousness that comes in. And I used to think it's like, oh my God, I have an upset stomach, right? Versus it's now, as you're saying that, I'm like, oh, that's almost probably, I'm just not resonating with something. It's not always, because I often think, I'm like, you eat well, what are you talking about, right? But it's like understanding the body through that, right? So when you're talking about body, it truly is this body presence.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. When we're in that state of disembodiment or cerebral, many times with a lot of my clients, when I ask them, what do you feel? They'll say, I'm angry, or I'm frustrated, or I feel, and I'm saying, but what's the sensation behind it? And that's how I know there's a disconnect, because they can't actually name the sensation, because we have disconnected from the sensory cues in our body. So that whole process of disembodiment and cerebral and aware and alignment is what I call our sensory information processing system, right? Where are we in our awareness of being able to notice and articulate what's going on? So we keep putting these big frames around things, but not actually knowing, oh, I have fluttering in my stomach. I'm feeling hot. I'm feeling cold. There's tingling in my fingers, right? These are all sensory cues which carry information.
Right. And often those, when we don't see it from that frame, as you mentioned earlier, this emotions is the information, but our emotions can take over, right? Can override so much, right?
Right. And our emotions tend to be driven by our intellect, which is cerebral, which is all about making up stories.
Right, right. You know, let's go back to relationship and that word. I think there's something, you know, even when you speak of, when we're chatting here about emotions that come up, and, you know, do men and women, do you work with both? How do they come from a very different lens, or we're all the same, you know, so we all have the same emotions? How does that,
Yes.
look at, because a lot of times it's like, you know, women are from Venus, men are from Mars. They don't understand us. We don't understand them. So, you know, because I think we're in an environment and in a world where, I know for myself, I'm like, I want men as much in my world and in my life instead of just women, because they are there to help bring us a different outlook, a different lens of life, and they're not going away. They're around us. So, right. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. I mean, I work with both because I think it's important. For a long time, I've actually run a lot of programs just for men.
Okay.
For men to have different conversations with themselves in the presence of other men, right? That's
and with a woman, does that bring up a trigger?
Absolutely. Yes and no. You know, I think it's funny because I grew up with brothers, right? And most of my cousins were boys. And so I've always been one of the boys, right? And I'm able to sort of speak their language and not fall into sort of that, the typical.
And, you know, as you're saying that, I'm laughing because I'm like, I took on the tomboy role for a very long time. I have no problem speaking to men. Well, in certain regards, but it's not been, right? So, and I think that's a great thing, right? For people that have brothers, or, right? Because I have brothers and sisters, but yeah, when we're already brought up navigating that a little bit different. So
exactly. And so it's not that we're different, right? So yes, physiologically we are different. For me, what's important is when I'm engaging with men and women is, am I looking at them from their gender, or am I looking at them from the force of who they are? Right. And what I've discovered in my work is our cultural conditioning is what is so heavy in terms of who we know and believe ourselves to be. It's how we're conditioned. Right. So men speak a different language because they've been conditioned to speak a different language, right, to women. When they're young and they start to cry, oh, be a big boy and don't cry. I mean, and this happens with women as well, but I think it, you know, so I'm really generalizing here.
Well, and we have to, you know.
Right, you know, but it's really, it's two different conditions, and in my practice, I've learned to notice the different cues. Okay. So as an example, women are more comfortable crying. So when stuff happens, they're more comfortable to cry. Well, men have been trained not to cry. Right. So how does water move in the body? They sweat. They have to go to the bathroom more. They feel cold. These are all water responses in the body. Right? Yeah. Right. So if you're looking for a man to cry and he's not crying, you say he's unemotional. But is he cold? Is he going to the bathroom a lot? Is he sweating? These are all water responses in the body.
Wow. Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
Interpreting these things is really important.
And so now I have to go back a little bit, which is, this is a lifelong journey that you've obviously been on. So where does now I want to sort of know a little bit more, where did that come up? I mean, you certainly had your own journey, but where do you discover all this, or just in pieces and pockets, and you sort of put it all together in this beautiful envelope to say, here's this invitation, people, like, start to access and discover, right? Absolutely. Because just listening to you, I'm like, oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it's been years. Like I said, I started my coaching practice back in 2009. Right. And it's been all of these years, and working with all different types of people from all different types of walks of life and industry and whatnot. And there's a commonality in it, right? And it's like, as all this information comes in, it gets all integrated, and it's like, oh, I have these moments of, oh my gosh, this makes so much more sense, right? Which then adds to the layers, plus my own journey.
Right. And that becomes your gift to share, right? And I think, you know, anyone that's listening, whatever that is, right? You're, because of that internal communications, you start to tap into that. You start to truly be able to live these gifts and live that self-love, right? And I think it's that slow process. We're always in this hurry to get there, right? So even working with a client, I suspect you're not just overnight, here we are and we're done. This is a journey we're taking.
It's a journey. It's a journey, and it takes as long as it takes, right? The beautiful thing about consciousness is there's a tipping point. And so I know that all of the experiences that I've had, all of the experiences in program rooms and running programs and with other people, we all have access to that information. So what I'm seeing is the acceleration is faster. So what took me a year to get something, someone is getting in one session. Right? Because we had this collective consciousness that's there.
And that's part of your evolutionary side, or you're still working in the, right?
Oh, absolutely. I call myself an evolutionary alchemist.
Right. So let's talk on that, because I think, or speak about this a little bit, because there's that quickening, right? And I think I remember hearing something not too long ago, but about how if you knew everything on the planet 100 years ago, it took them 100 years to figure it all out. Now we're like this.
Right.
Again, we're so tapped in with technology, and we do have access, but without the discernment of the access, that's what's overriding the system.
Right.
So let's go into some of this quantum evolutionary part, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm all about the science.
Yeah, and I love because I'm delving into it so much more. So yes, please share with them. I know parts of it, so please, yeah.
You know, the science and magic, right? They're one and the same. Like you said, if we went back 100 years and we showed someone what our technology, I mean, let's not even go back 100 years. Let's go back 30 years. When
these new sciences are really only 40 years proving things. So yeah.
Exactly, right? And now we have the quantum sciences, right? We had the Newtonian science, which took us so far. And now we're having the quantum sciences, right? Which doesn't mean that Newtonian was wrong. It's just like, there's so much more. And every day we're finding out so much more about it. We live in a holographic universe.
And let's clarify that for people that, you know, there's this Newtonian, and then there's, right? Because that's the world that's existed for so long. So just share a little tiny bit for people that don't, they're like, you hear the words, but they don't know.
Right. So
and then the other.
Right. So Newtonian is like Newton, right? Newton's laws, right? Very mechanistic, right? That's the whole industrialization world. And then all of a sudden this new science called quantum sciences came up, where they said, oh, just by observing something changes, right? That we live in a holographic universe, which means our mind creates a story of what we're seeing and experiencing, and we can change that. We have the power to change that. And I think this is where we're now beginning to delve into. We have the power to change our lives. We don't have to be victim to our lives, and everything is encompassing. So our experiences are part of it. The information that's in our cellular structure is part of it. Our perceptions of things is part of it. It's all part of it. And we have the power. It's malleable. We can change it. So when I say to my clients, your life can change in a breath, absolutely. And they go, oh my God, that's not possible. Like, you know, that's impossible. And I'll say, all right, well, before you had your first kiss, did your life not change when you had your first kiss? Did your life not change?
It's a good one. Hell yeah. No, sorry.
Right. You know, did your life not, if you had children, when that baby came out, your life changed in a breath when that child came out, right? Our life changes in a breath all the time.
Is it, maybe the question is it slowing down to see it? Is it just knowing that the possibility is there? Is it, you know, being open to see it, or are we on guard too much then, right? Like, because all of these things play these incredible factors. And I think for those that still are maybe stuck to that idea, it's, you know, just open up a little bit.
Yeah. It's scary. It's scary, right? I often say this journey is not for the faint of heart, because it it requires us really challenging what we have known and what we have been taught to discover something different, to discover that we're more than what we have been taught.
Right.
And it's it can be absolutely terrifying to know that I am the creator of my world
Right.
and that I have the power to change my world.
And that it can happen in a heartbeat, or it can take years of reprogramming. Right.
Absolutely.
And I say years, certainly, again, that's the quantum thing. It's not the time, it's the appreciation for the fact that, okay, you might be somebody in the audience that's 32 coming across this. You've had 32 years of buildup, and that's just this physical lifetime that as you know it, right? We don't need to go the full gamut, but versus somebody who's coming to it that's 55, right? You have a few more years, you have different experiences, and it's all of that.
Right. Exactly. And
honoring the journey.
And we look at things linearly, right? And for me, it's really about cycles. So I love spirals because we have access to it all the time. And the thing I'll say to my younger clients who are in their 20s and 30s, the only thing I have on you is time, is experience, right? Which means I have more layers of things that I typically have
potentially
work through, right? But it doesn't, I never say that I'm better than, or I just have more experience. That's all. Right? There are things that some of the younger people have are experiences that I have no idea about, right? That I cannot speak to because it's not my experience, and they're the experts in that field.
And that's a hard one for a lot of people, right? We were this high achiever, this high stress that you speak of, and the perfectionism. We were taught we needed to know it, right?
Yes.
So to think that we can't possibly know it, and then it's like, once you start to clear some of that, you start to realize how big the word world really means, like what that encompasses fully, right?
And in today's world, if we take a snapshot of today, where we are in this pandemic and COVID, and it's global, and it has been an invitation for us to go inside, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? We're in our homes with people 24/7, 300, almost 365 days, right? Where it has been an invitation for us to open up and look at all the things that we kind of put under the carpet, right? So to become aware, so we can make different choices about how we're living our life. It's a highly stressful time for a lot of people. And, this Art of Love, that initiative that you're doing, is so important, because I think it's so important for us to remember we come from a place of love, and we can find answers for ourselves and others from that place of honoring. So for me, there's a journey to love. There's a journey back to love. And it starts with honoring. Am I willing to honor myself and another? That's one of the steps in finding love for myself.
Right. And I don't even know if I've shared this with anyone, just with respect to this reunion coming up. A big part of this past year for myself, I live alone. So I did take a really deep self-love, reflection, awareness, consciousness path, and really delved in it. But I truly honor people that have families and are doing this, I'll say, processing and this journey with other people in the house. So how do you help people navigate or touch on that, maybe, or something you might want to share? Because it does start at home, internal, but how do you either bring people on board? Do you in your family? Do you keep them unaware of what you're doing? Where do you sort of guide people to maybe explore that, right?
It really is a dance. And I was in a conversation with a colleague for 4 years. It was an initiative we called Reimagining Me and We, because it was about the journey starts with self, the me, and then it becomes, then how do we engage this as we, right? And to know that we're all on our own journey. And for me, it's about helping my clients to recognize the sharing of the journey, right? As an invitation. I think where we get hung up a lot of times, especially when we have other people, partners, kids, parents, siblings, is we want them to come along with us,
Mhm.
right? And it's understanding that they're on their journey as well. And this is where the word honor comes in.
Mhm.
As I honor myself, am I willing to honor another in where they are? And to have these very tough, open, honest, clear conversations. We don't have to be on the same page. It's, are we willing to engage in the conversation with each other to find out what moves inside of us so that we can find ourselves somewhere different, right? So, internal conversation that's then expressed externally. If you think about it, for those of you listening, how many times are you having a conversation with someone and there's a whole other conversation going on inside your head? And so the journey, part of the journey is about helping people to bring that conversation out in a way that isn't an attack on the other person, which is about, really, it's all about me,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
right? And learning that.
And honoring, respecting that the other is going to have whatever, right? And that's where emotions come up, and then that's right, this information, this sensing, and because it can be such a beautiful unfolding, I'm sure, right? Like, you know,
Right.
and I say I'm sure, I'm not in a house, like I said, right? I'm looking forward to it again, but anyway, that's a whole different story. Anyway, yeah, so
Our
what,
notion of love too, I just want to quickly, we've learned love is this, here's me, here's you, and together we come together and there's this, and
right.
we coexist in this piece that's in the center. So
Mm-hmm.
how much of ourselves do we hive off?
Mm-hmm.
My notion of love is, here's all of me, here's all of the other person, and together we create something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to give up any part of me in that. And that's where unconditional love of self
Mm-hmm.
can then become unconditional love of other. Whatever conditions you have on loving yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you can be sure you have those conditions when you're loving another.
Right, and somebody's mirroring that back to you, right?
Right.
You use the word and have used the word invitation a number of times, and I love that, and I understand it, but I'd like you to share maybe a little bit about that word and that word choice, because we were talking about the power of words. So because I think more people need to use that word, or the invitation's there to use the word invitation. They don't need to, but the choice is there. So can you share that word?
Yeah, the invitation for me is a beautiful word. I don't give advice. Right? This is something that I never do, because you give advice that comes with expectation that if I tell you what to do, you're going to go off and do it, and then I'm now responsible for the outcome of that. And so I, through my journey and in my work with my clients, what I've discovered over the years is, when we live our lives in honor of ourselves and others, we become the invitation for others to live their, to make that choice for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so rather than having the expectation, which is a huge loaded word, uh, there are often expectations that we don't know we have until something happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so that invitation of, I'm going to live my life a certain way, so that you get to go, oh, I want some of that. How did you do that?
Right.
And now I'm willing to share my journey as the invitation. If I try to tell you how to live your life, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your journey is. I don't know why you're here.
And again, back to the I'll use couples, other people, families, whatever. We all think, well, we're all the same. We were at the ball game together. We ate dinner together. We all know the expectations in the house, but they're not understanding the experience, that emotion, and what someone else is there to bring to the table, right?
And that everyone has a different experience, right? And we just came off of the holidays, and that's always a perfect example. You're sitting around the table and you're recalling some experience, some trip that you all went on, and everybody has a different perspective, and everybody's trying to fight to say, no, it didn't happen that way, it happened this way, and no, it didn't. Well, everybody had a different experience. Mm-hmm. What if it was all true?
Right. What if it was all true? So Exactly. That's the invitation for sure. Let's chat about integration, because I think there's so much, and working with your clients, what's the advice on integrating this? There's this time, because again, I know I'm using this word that has many connotations, but let's just talk about integration and resting, and a little bit deeper in that, because I think that grounds that self-love even more and more, which allows you to be more curious, to experience more, not to, feel lost in this mix of life. So
Integration is huge. It's absolutely integral, right? And again, part of the process is about helping people get out of their heads and into their bodies, because that's where the integration actually happens. It's in the body. And later on, at some point, I often do what I call a white feather guided reflection to help people actually come inside themselves, because you actually have to be inside yourself in order for information to be processed and integrated. Right? When we're hovering above ourselves, when something happens, when we're stressed and we vacate, and then we only come back in once everything's settled, nothing changes. So integration happens when we're willing to be inside ourselves, when we're willing to use the breath to move the information that's actually rumbling around inside of ourselves, so that we can become more. And it takes practice, like everything else, everything that's meaningful, it takes practice, right?
And nice way to say it, anything that's meaningful, right? Because I think practice and rituals and habits and all of these things are like, can't we just figure this out sooner? Like, I don't have time for that. Versus, slow down, you are so beautiful, right? Like, we're so beautiful when we can slow down to that.
And know that every choice we make in the moment is perfect, and that we get to change our mind. I think we get locked in, and that's again a cerebral thing. We get locked into, I made this choice, I now have to stick with it. Right? And that we can change our mind.
And that in and of itself comes from a lot of programming, and programming from just even in your day-to-day work, right? If you're not an entrepreneur and sort of setting your own rules, shall we call it, just for a word, but you're whether you're working for the government, you're working for a big organization, they've set these parameters, right? So it's, how do I get to, be the one that chooses that, right?
Right. And again, rules are important, right? They help keep our society. You don't want people driving through stop signs and red lights and things like that. I think it's more a matter of paying attention to what are the rules, right? And again, those words, those internal conversations that we may be aware or not aware that we're having with ourselves and others, right? And so that, again, and our body is giving us cues all the time. You say something and your stomach tightens. You say yes, but you really want to say no, right? And there's this conversation going on inside of you. Or you say no, and you really want to say yes, right? And so it really becomes a matter of, and this is an uncomfortable process. So it's a process of becoming comfortable being uncomfortable, right? So that we can move beyond the rules and the boundaries that we've set for ourselves.
Because at that point, you're making the choice to be uncomfortable. Right? Instead of, again, it's coming at me and I have no say in any of this, right?
Yeah.
And then when you open, as they say, Pandora's box, and you want to know more, and you want to evolve, and you want to see yourself in a greater version, which is out there, it's prevalent, all of these words, but to truly take that to the heart of the self is the big journey. And this whole experience that we have together about that reuniting, that reunion with yourself, and this reunion with the community, it's seeing yourself and then seeing another, knowing that they're on their own journey and not taking all of that to your own heart. You can only fill them up, and as much as you have yourself filled up, right?
Absolutely. And the word, again, words, right? You mentioned the word Pandora's box, and for so many years, that's how I kept myself small. And I think that's how a lot of us keep ourselves small, is thinking, oh, if I open up this Pandora's box, what's going to come out of there, because we know when Pandora opened the box, it was death and destruction everywhere. And I remember someone once saying to me when I was going through my journey, what if it's not Pandora's box? What if it's a box of treasures? Right? And just that, I went, oh, what if we were to consider it being a box of treasures that we've locked away?
Yeah, we've been on that spectrum of fear for so long, and the opposite's love, right? So, and from the
and we are now in the age of Aquarius, right? Which is all about connection and community and harmony. And so we're being invited to step out of what was the Pisces age, or the Piscean age of power and struggle and right and all of that. And so I think we're in this interesting time now of reconciling and integrating and processing these two very different worlds that we know so well inside of ourselves.
And the technology, I mean, Aquarius has this technology, but the technology of the heart, the technology of this beautiful thing that we're able to share and speak with each other and be able to connect, right? It's from that space. Connection is this, it's everything, right? So just wrapping our heads around, sometimes we have the mask over, and other times we're able to see a person and love that, because that's the beauty. I think, when we look at all of this, where we have no idea when it's going to be over, and every country's dealing with it from some other regard, to say, have your own internal journey, find that community, the people that are with you. So, well, this has been fabulous. Thank you. We're coming to an end, but I've asked everyone to sort of share, if they would, what can you leave, whether that's a word, a phrase, something you want to leave everyone with, so that when they're thinking of their internal communications or this evolutionary process that we spoke of, and realignment, what word, what phrase can sort of sum up how you would love to leave everyone to keep moving forward at home in the self?
I think the phrase that I often use and invite my clients to consider is, am I willing? Right? Am I willing is a powerful way to start an inquiry, because it is an invitation as opposed to a command, right? I think in today's world, we are so used to commands. You have to, I should, I'm going to try, right? And just by shifting it to, am I willing? Am I willing to go for that walk today?
Right, starting simple.
Am I willing to exercise this morning? Am I willing to have that apple instead of the bag of chips? Right? We're no longer commanding ourselves. It's like, oh, am I willing? And so our defenses that usually come up to say no go, oh, it's an invitation.
And am I willing to learn what you are rumbling inside me that I keep ignoring?
Yes.
Right? Am I willing? Because we can start soft, and I totally encourage, start with the apple, start with the pieces, because everybody's going to have a different journey with what that is. But am I willing to look at something from a different perspective? Right? Yeah. That's beautiful. The word command is a word often, and not to take this, because this could go on a whole other tangent, but even you said earlier about us creating this reality, and a lot of people want to say, I command you, and I'm commanding myself, and I'm commanding the universe. And it's like, if that word command does not bring an essence of pure sovereign power to the universe and to yourself, you're just shooting yourself in the foot in a nice way, right? Like you've just stubbed your toe.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Am I willing? Okay, everyone. So are you willing? This is beautiful. I can't thank you enough. So as much as we're ending this time together, I want everybody to be fully aware that Lisa is going to, she mentioned it earlier, but in our collection of at-home solutions, she's putting together in that a beautiful feather exercise and something to really help you to come into the body, which is so key for all of this. So tune into that through the other outlets that we're indicating through all of this reunion. And I thank you again very much for your time with me this morning.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. I'm so happy to be a part of this.
Wonderful, wonderful. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.